I mean, we are ahead of the schedule a little bit, but I mean, we also was a little bit earlier in the day. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'd say that's fine. Go for it. Take it away.
Sure, thank
You
you.
are
So
now
am I live already?
You are now unmuted.
Yep, you're live.
Oh, splendid. So I'll just start the timer to make sure that I don't go overboard.
Awesome.
All right. So
You are now muted.
okay, good to go now. So hello again, everyone. So I hope you had, well, quite a lot of talks since the last one I did, and all more interesting one after the other. So, you know, I'm in a bit of a weird spot right now because I'm supposed to be presenting to you, as you can see on my screen, one big ass org file, multiple tiny ones. Finally, the end of the debate. And it sounds about as clickbaity as you can possibly get with those topics. And by the way, credit where credit is due. The title is not mine. It's actually from Bastien Guéry, the current org mode maintainer. And yeah, I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about this question, because if you are used to going on r/emacs, you know, the subreddit that we have, if you go on Hacker News often, you know, it's a question that you see pop up every once in a while. Should I be using one big file, or should I be using a lot of tiny files? And I believe, you know, we've got defenders on both sides. If I just show you one examples, so we have Carl Voigt, okay, so who's one of the organizers for the conference. He is the guy who probably has the biggest org mode files right now in all the people I know, and God knows I know plenty of people who use org mode. But if you just look at this line, I hope it's not too small. Let me just make it a little larger. But Carl basically has a file with 126,000 lines. And I'm just going to pause and try to have you imagine how large a file it actually is. Just think about all of these lines being tasks in your days. Think about all those lines being about little thoughts, you know, that you've had throughout the day or projects that you were working on. And it's massive. And you know, one of the problems that Carl Voigt actually approaches on this topic is that it takes him roughly 20 seconds to get his org agenda going, which is a massive amount of time. I mean, we have very fast computers now. You know, ever since Emacs was created in 1976, computers, I have no idea how much faster they've gotten. And yet, you know, for 100,000 lines, Emacs seems to be choking, and it's certainly not reasonable in a way to have to wait 20 seconds just for your entire file to be passed. So basically what I want to do, and by the way, I forgot to do the presentation, but I'm Leo Vivier. I did this before for those who were around, and I help maintain a software which is called Orgrome, and that's the expertise that I have on the topic. Actually, if you go online, I do have a GitHub page. I will make sure that you have all the links available afterwards. But I do publish my init files, and you can see if you scroll at the bottom, I have a little demonstration which shows you the fancy things that I can do with my org mode setup. And that might be even interesting in light of the talk you've just had about GTD stuff, because the first one is about how I handle my projects. The second one is about the flow from a task as I work on it. So I won't spend too much time on this, but basically that's my expertise. I have spent 8 years working with org mode, 3 of them actually thinking about writing packages. And the thing is, if I go into a little bit of details, and obviously it's only a lightning talk, so I won't have time to actually go really in depth about it, but there is something in the org mode libraries which is called org elements, and you have the name right there, org elements.el, .el being for elisp file. And as you can see, the page, it's on the org wiki, so it's accessible by everyone, but it's basically the API that org mode uses to parse org mode files. So for those who don't know, parsing means basically checking a file, checking all the content of the file, and extracting all the information that we need from that file. And as you can imagine, you all have org mode files in your mind. Well, you know, they can be fairly complex. You know, you can have properties, you can have contextual information. Like if you write a line which starts at column 0, which means at the left, you know, it doesn't have the same meaning whether or not it is before the beginning of a headline or if it is after the beginning of a headline. You know, it's going to be relatively different, hierarchically speaking. And so the problem when it comes to the question of many files versus one big file or few big files is that we always have to keep in mind what org elements want you to do. And the thing is, there are plenty of problems when it comes to parsing file. The first one being obviously that Emacs is a single thread process, or has some threading capabilities. We're not going to go into the details right now. That's not my goal. But it makes it incredibly hard to parallelize parsing processes as we currently, with the current technology. And so you'd have to imagine that if you have a very large files, if we go back to the example of Carl Voice from before, 100,000 lines, that means that you have to scan through every single line, basically. Because sometimes, let's just say that you have a property drawer, for instance, which tells you, oh, okay, this tree has the tag foo. So the problem is there are multiple ways for you to define a tag, okay? So you can use the usual way, which is about wrapping in colons the tag at the end of a heading. So for instance, if I'm not going to switch to Emacs, that's going to waste too much time. But that's one way to say a tag. But say you have tag inheritance, which means that when you have a parent with a tag, you also want the child to inherit the tag. So if you have first heading with the tag foo, you have the first subheading, and the tag foo is implied. Now imagine having to do that with a file that is completely nested, a file that has maybe 9, 10, 11 levels of depth to it. It's mind-bogglingly complicated for the software to do that, knowing that I've told you about tags, but any property can be inheritable. Anything like priorities, even though why would you do this? You can have groups, you can all this. And as someone who went through the trouble of optimizing his org agenda, so basically if we go back to the GIFs, oh god, we've already had this discussion between the Git and Magit, and now I've started GIF and GIF, and I only have 1 more minute left to do so, so let's just say I'm going to say GIF, just to spite people. So if you go on the way I organize my agenda, what I did in order to keep my agenda build time under 2 seconds is that I've rewritten a whole lot of codes to be able to parse my org agenda files. So the thing is, I'm going to be talking more about this later. I only have, let's say, 1 minute to conclude. So, as you've gathered, I'm not going to be giving you the answer right now. I'm going to be talking about org-roam a little later, which is about following the principle of having many small files. But as someone who has been using one large file to manage my life, you know, I'm sitting on the fence. I do not know which one is the best. But I hope that my presentation has given you a little idea of what goes on behind the principles. And you also need to think about the philosophy behind the organization of your nodes. But I hope to be approaching this topic with you in about 2 hours or so, maybe 1 hour actually. So I'm actually finished. I've decided to leave you 2 minutes for questions. So if someone could feed me the question, that might be best, because I don't want to. Oh, actually, I can just open the. I can just open the pad. Give me a second.
Okay.
It's just loading up. I might stop showing my screen. That might make it easier. So, I mean, if you could make myself big now on the screen, that would be splendid.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. So, where are we? Question 12. Okay, so what's better, one big file? Is it a jab to tell me that I haven't answered the question because someone just asked me the question? Well, personally, if I were to give you a quick answer in like 20 seconds, personally, I think it's a question that is contextually based. Do you want something that is efficient as far as optimization is concerned? Then you need to think about this. And personally, for all the organization that I do, all the stuff, all the to-dos that I handle, I like to do this in one simple big file because you benefit from all the refiling capabilities of org mode. So I would do that. But for knowledge management, for note-taking and all this, well, I'd much rather follow the org-roam way of doing things, which is about having many small files. Okay, I'm not getting any more questions. I'm not sure if there is one on ISC that could be fed to me. Otherwise, I'm happy to pass over to the next speaker. And by the way, just before I finish, Your world is a lie. It's not a three-piece suit. I'm wearing jeans below. So I hope that satisfies your curiosity. Okay, there's one more
see.
question appearing, but otherwise one big file to have everything. So I'm putting you on the spot, I believe. It was such a short talk. The problem is I just wanted to give you a little answer or a little, path of thinking on this topic. But obviously it's a topic I could be spending 40 minutes on, but I'm going to be drained. You're going to be drained. Nobody's going to be happy if I do this. So, and someone asked me if I switch between British and French accents. So a little secret for you. When I'm stressed, I tend to revert to a French accent. So you can measure the amount of stress that I'm feeling during this talk with the amount of H's that I drop and the amount of sheer fright that you can see sometimes in my eyes when I'm thinking about what to say next. All right, so do you believe we can leave it at that? And people will see plenty more of me later on anyway.
Right. So looking at the schedule, I think your talk has until like 2:02, meaning like 5 or 6 minutes from now.
Right.
Yeah. So if you do like to take like 1 or 2 questions, two more questions, by all means.
Okay. So someone has asked me, what is the Emacs icon? Sorry. See, another French accent here. In my status bar. Sorry, I'm not sharing anymore. I might just share again just so that everyone can catch a glimpse of that. There we go. Allow. So it should be. So if you could make me small again, I'm not sure if it's going to do it by itself.
Yep.
But I do have a little icon here in my status bar, which is basically a way to interact with org protocol. I'm not going to look for it right now, but it's a browser extension that is developed by one of my friends over at Ranger, whose name is Vivier. And it's very useful. I'm someone who uses a lot of org protocols. And by the way, I used to teach English, to high schoolers, and they were supremely worried when I show them my status line and they saw kill and explore in my status line. So as fellow Emacs users, you know that obviously kill means to kill a selection of text and keep it inside your clipboard. But for my students who, they were very worried about what their professor was up to during his nights. So let's see if we've got more questions. So I'm showing you the questions and the rainbow. So let's see if we've got more. So people are pasting a lot of questions now. So how do you feel about archiving files in org mode, and how can that work in? So one of the things when we think about optimization is, yes, archiving done trees is a good idea, because it means that if we go back to the org element, the way it works, and we'll get into technical details afterwards. I'm giving a presentation about org-run technical aspect, so I'll have a chance to expound a little more on this. But basically, org elements need to, every time it sees a to-do, it has to consider it, even though it is a done to-do. Why? Because let's say, for instance, that in your agenda, you want to activate log mode, which is going to show the tasks which are done. Now, you could be clever and say, the org agenda does not need to show done items, so it's not going to look for them. But the problem is that org element is always called. It always needs to pass the buffer. Nicolas Goaziou, who is the French developer who's worked a whole lot on org elements, has gone through a lot of trouble to optimize org elements. But the problem is there's just so much that we can do with a concurrent process. And right now, it leaves somewhat, things to be desired. But we're working on it. And one more time, I feel like I spent half of this talk teasing my next talks, but I'll be talking more about this in my future talks in about 1 to 2 hours. So continuing with the questions, how big are my org files? So in the background, I'm just going to check how many lines I have in my main file. So in my own file, so the one I told you about where I keep all my to-do GTD stuff, I have 38,000 lines, which is, it's sizable, definitely, but I do archive a lot of stuff. So that might be a slight difference between myself and Carl Voigt, even though I don't remember if they actually archive stuff. So does it not consume more resources and time to load multiple files than a large file of the same content? Now, theoretically, yes. Having many files open concurrently is slightly slower than having one main file opened. Now, the problem is, for those of you who have large files, you may have noticed that when you are scrolling in a very large file, it starts taking quite a bit of time. Why? It's because, in org mode, you have a lot of content that is hidden. So when you have the view mode, which hides as much stuff as possible, meaning that you only see the top heading, and I'm checking the time, don't worry, I'm finished on this one. When you're hiding a whole lot of stuff, org mode needs to keep track, or I should say Emacs needs to keep track of which areas of text to show and which areas of text to hide. And the problem is that when you're hiding stuff, let's say you're moving from the first heading to the second heading, but you've got like 10,000 lines between those two headings. Well, Emacs needs to compute the difference between the two passages, and that takes quite a lot of time. And that's why you might realize that it's a little choppy when you start scrolling in large files. Anyway, I could be answering questions about org mode for literally 2 hours straight. So I'm going to hand it over to the next speakers, and I'll be seeing you guys a little later.
Thank you very much, Leo.
Oh, thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.